Rising joining us, and that'll be Alex, who's also part of our cohort. Let me just go to the next slide. Okay, in terms of introductions, my visual description is I have long black hair, a gray top, and a beige background. I'm a able-bodied cis woman from the Vietnamese Chinese diaspora. My name is Era. I'm also one of the cohort members, and I'll pass it on to Brittany.
Hi everyone, my name is Brittany. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a queer, Latinx, first generation cisgender woman. I have light skin, long dark hair, big gold glasses, and a septum ring. Wearing a dark shirt and a dark turtleneck. And then I have a plain white wall background, a beige curtain to my left, and then a little headboard over here in the back.
All right, thanks, Brittany. And you also notice that we have photographs on our slides, and they're all from KZ, who's also a cohort member of ours. And before we begin our session, we're going to do what we always do, which is a land acknowledgement. So we want to acknowledge that San Francisco is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We encourage non-Indigenous members to uplift the work of rematriation and land taxes. And our Zoom moderator will be placing a link to donate to land taxes for the Ramaytush Ohlone in the chat. We also want to be mindful of how are we intentionally creating Black, Indigenous, and people of color centered spaces. We want to move forward by creating practices to prioritize Black, Indigenous, people of color members and proactively decenter whiteness, dismantle white supremacy, anti-Blackness, misogynoir, and colorism. So because of that, when we have our facilitated discussion, our Q&A, it'll be open first to BIPOC, centering LGBTQ+ and disabled Black, Indigenous, people of color first, the last 5 minutes being open to all, such as non-BIPOC folks. So again, this is something that we're still exploring as a cohort, and hopefully when we do future community education projects, it'll be something that will be more established in a co-created space. And when it comes to the breakout rooms, please do message the person marked as host, and then we'll be mindful of having breakout rooms that are safe spaces for everyone to openly discuss their thoughts. We are also having a mutual aid fundraiser. Thank you to everyone that has donated so far. All this will be contributed to into $50 stipends that will be given to our speakers. And hopefully by January of next year, after we do our art auctions and other crowdsourcing events, we're able to just provide all the stipends that are needed for people that are really giving their time and effort into creating the materials for this class. Regarding collective care, normally we have our coordinators, Tiara, alongside with Kari supporting us. Unfortunately, Kari is unable to make it today. So if you also want to give feedback, please do put that in the forum, and that URL will be shared in the chat by Jacqueline. All right, so something that is related to our class is this idea of, as we're approaching legislation, we want to be mindful of non-reformist reforms. So I just have a snippet of what that definition is, which is it's something that doesn't feed into the capitalist agenda, where instead it's focused on what should be and requires implementation of fundamental political and economic changes. And whether that change is sudden or gradual is immaterial. It's all about how we're really shifting modes of power, which is something that we've been discussing throughout our class, especially in the abolitionist technology session that happened last week. And related to that, I think folks have seen the 8 steps to abolition before, and that's an excellent example of non-reformist reforms that are really shifting power back to community and also chipping away at the existing power structure of the state and how the state really controls different aspects of violence. And then there's a quote from Mariam Kaba saying that for these non-reformist reforms, it's about how are we thinking about reforms that don't make it harder for us to dismantle the systems. And that's just something to keep in mind as we progress through the session and as Alex discusses the strategies when it comes to organizing in a legislative space, but then also in the grassroots level as well. And then I'm going to pass it on to Brittany, who will be introducing Alex.
Yeah, thanks y'all. So my apologies, I forgot to introduce the topic at the beginning of the class. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce what our topic is for the class today, and then I'm gonna introduce our dope ass speaker. So today we will be discussing legislation and non-reformist reforms. We are joined by Alex Salama from SF Rising, who will discuss their legislative and political work, such as their Free College for All campaign. At the end of our session, we will discuss non-reformist reforms in relation to our class goals of creating an introductory abolition class at CCSF, an abolitionist community safety program, and ballot measure to defund the police. On to our speaker. Alex Salama is the student organizer at San Francisco Rising, lead student organizer at San Francisco Rising, a grassroots community organization building political power of working class communities and communities of color in San Francisco. Their work is connected to student organizing to build student power against institutional capitalism in hopes of canceling student debt for SFR's larger vision, college for all, free college for all. Alex is also a second-year graduate student at the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University, and I have the honor of calling her a good friend. So, thank
you. Appreciate you, Brittany. And yeah, fun fact, I know Brittany from my high school years, which seem very far away at this point. But hi, everyone. It's really good to be with all of you. My name is Alex. I am a brown, queer, first-generation Latinx STEM person. I have long black hair that's currently in one braid. I have black headphones on. I have a nose ring, and I'm wearing green glasses and a black long sleeve shirt. And I have a white background with posters in the background that say defund the police and end police violence. So that's me. And it's really exciting to be here with all of you today. I want to shout out Kay, who's also on the SFR team. And they're a really dope ass student organizer too. And they're gonna see this whole presentation that they already know so much about. I want to mention that it's a lot of information. I know I'm the only presenter for tonight, and so I definitely want to encourage people to make this feel like a conversation. I'm not one to like lecture. I'm really one to like be in conversation with like comrades and community members. And so if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, if there's something you want me to slow down about, feel free to stop me or put it in the chat. Sometimes I can't always see the chat, so I don't mind it if folks interrupt me. I just want to name that. And as mentioned, I'll be talking about San Francisco Rising, some of our campaigns, with a big emphasis on abolishing student debt, which is the work that I do. And a little bit of what y'all can expect is, I want to go into depth for folks who don't know who SFR is, San Francisco Rising. I'll talk about our campaign and our vision for free college for all. I'll talk about some strategies and tactics and what does that really mean in movement work, and how to get involved. If you're interested in what I say tonight, I would love for y'all to join us at our monthly student meeting or any of our phone banks that we have going on until the end of the month. So who is San Francisco Rising? We're a collective of 8 grassroots organizations who work on various issues like immigration rights, worker organizing, affordable housing, tenant rights, youth organizing around restorative justice, environmental justice, mental health, student debt cancellation, and a lot more. Some folks might feel familiar with some of our partners. So Casa Justa, Just Cause, Mujeres Unidas y Activas, La Colectiva, Poder, CPA, Chinese Progressive Association, SUMCON, Coleman Advocates, the Filipino Community Center, all of our partners and our collaborative that does amazing work that I feel really lucky to be in community with as we make decisions. And a little bit of what brought this collective together. So we formed from 2 existing coalitions 11 years ago. So the Southeast San Francisco, District 11, and from the May 1st Alliance, which was like an anti-imperial, anti-war alliance. And yeah, we really were created because we felt like when it came to voting, our communities were always excluded, right? Like oftentimes you'll see like, yeah, in our communities, we're not the ones that have people canvassing us. We're never phone banked. And yet we're the people who are at the expense of this legislation or of these like bills or policies that are passed. And why are we not more involved in the conversation? So it really came from wanting to be involved, but also the representation of the communities who are most impacted by these issues. And so a little bit of like what it looked like was integrated voter engagement which meant like political education, campaigns, electoral work, and really just wanting to be on the front lines of our elections. And yeah, it's been really exciting to even see the ways that San Francisco Rising Action Fund goes through like endorsement interviews, because, you know, if we want it to be a collective process, we want everything to feel like we're in coalition, like we're collectively building power together. And so, yeah, this has come from a long work of so many organizers who really saw the need and the ways that we're trying to build more like worker or student to organizing pipelines in our communities. And so in 2010, when we formed San Francisco Rising and San Francisco Rising Action Fund, which works on like political campaigns, it was to create a vehicle to build power for working class people of color, to carve out political leadership in progressive wing of San Francisco politics, and to run our own campaigns to contest for power and build skills. That's really one of our main focuses, is like we want to be in charge of our own campaigns because we know what our communities need. And so since then, I feel really lucky that San Francisco Rising has won a lot of campaigns, many that, as y'all see here, around like ballot measures, right? So if folks have lived in the city for hopefully all their lives, but for a long time, then they know free muni for youth, $15 minimum wage, millionaires tax to fund public education, free city college. I'm so lucky to be here with all of y'all today, universal childcare. And can I actually get a volunteer to read this definition out loud?
I can read it.
Thank you.
So it says, what is a campaign? A campaign is an intensive, sustained, and coordinated organizing fight that uses the collective power of organizations to strike at a target until it meets your demands.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is a definition from the School of Unity and Liberation, Seoul and Oakland, which I've just learned so much from. I did like a 3-day organizing training with them. And yeah, a lot of the definitions that I'll share today come from the organizing and the political education that they've done around other organizers in the Bay Area. And I have this smaller definition. It's not as important. I really want to focus on this first one around it's intensive, it's sustained, and it's coordinated, right? We want to be very organized when we have campaigns, and that's why it's really important to come at this organizing with like very clear demands. And so, yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about like our student debt cancellation campaign and the history of how this campaign even started. And so it came out of 2018, the College for All campaign in California. And the College for All was a proposal to cover tuition at all public colleges and increase living assistance aid, which would have been like stipends, to all undergrad California residents by enacting an estate tax on the wealthiest 0.2% of people who live in California, which really could have made all of the difference, right? And so this tax would have brought in $4 billion in revenue, which could have paid for everybody to go to school for free in the state of California, which is one of the, if not the biggest state in this empire. And so, yeah, I think College for All connects to an abolitionist agenda because we do believe education is one of the pillars of liberation. It's something that we see as a way of not only liberating ourselves, but in being in community. And we believe in all education. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the academy, but we know that like education has historically been very gatekept, not only monetarily, but through SAT scores, through application processes, through white requirements, but they feel very adjacent to people in close proximity to whiteness. And so education just is a way that we see as like an outlet. It is also known to be one of the main ways to reduce recidivism rates, right? But education isn't always offered to formerly incarcerated folks. And so we really hope through the dismantling of hierarchies and institutions, we can build something much more accessible and equitable and sustainable for all people. And that doesn't have to come with predatory loans. And so we really view our student debt cancellation campaign as a stepping stone towards all of this. Very similarly, the way that I feel about defunding the police, it's a stepping stone towards an abolitionist world, which is building life-affirming institutions, right? And so if we cancel student debt, then we can have that, that imagining of free college for everyone. And so, yeah, folks might be like, what is an estate tax? I low-key did not know until I started doing some of this work. And so an estate tax is an annual tax on property transferred from deceased person to their heirs. So this impacts the wealthiest 0.2 people in California, which is still 3,000 people, right? All of the people who live on the coast or in the beach, 0.2%. It really isn't much. And the tax is really like 12 to 22% of their wealth. And a lot of these people have they own multiple houses and stocks and all of this assets, and they don't need this wealth. They don't need to be acquiring so much that they refuse to pay these taxes that could give people accessibility to education, right? And this was very inclusive of all students, right? Formerly incarcerated students, undocumented students, and the 386,000 working class students, right? And so these sometimes are students who aren't people who could really qualify for loans or for all the other reasons why financial aid is predatory and can be just very harmful to our communities. And I know, like myself, as a first generation student, as somebody who's in grad school, it has been so difficult to navigate the financial aid world where I'm not sure what I'm signing, but I'm so desperate for an education because I have dreams, right? And sometimes they're not even my dreams. They are the dreams of my communities, of my parents. You know, my dad never finished high school. And so what is the world that I'm building so that I could take care of myself, my community, and my family, right? And so it really is something that I think has to be done as a collective, as a community when we're fighting for these things. And they have to be inclusive of all students, right? I named some of these students, but these are also disabled students. This is also queer students, trans students, all of these students that are often very excluded from these conversations. And so, yeah, we wanted to win. And so what would that have looked like if we could have won? And that would have been to put it on the ballot so that people could have voted on it, so that it could have been a real tax, so that people, and there's a long line of what that looks like, right? So we would have to get on the ballot, it would have to pass, and then it would still then have to go through the House, all of these, the member assemblies, all of these other legislative processes. And unfortunately, we did not have enough signatures to pass. And it's just really shitty to think something that could have benefited so many people, unfortunately, didn't pass because of signatures. And we tried to go many different routes. We tried to go the lobbying route. And it was really sad. A lot of people didn't actually agree with us because they didn't feel like we had enough support from professors. And, when I think back, it's the fact that professors aren't supporting students or something that could make all of the difference in students, something that even professors could have benefited from. I think there has been a lot of reflection, and it's the reason why we haven't given up. It's the reason why we're still fighting for these things. And it's exactly why we still see it as our priority here. And we know it's possible because Free City College has proven to be a North Star in a lot of our organizing. And it's why we believe that student debt cancellation is our liberation, because we do know how harmful and how predatory student debt can be. And we see it as, as one of our imaginings and one of our dreamings when we're thinking about what could be possible in the Bay Area. And I also really want to ground us in some facts of what does the student debt in the Bay Area look like. If I could have maybe somebody read this first star.
In the Bay Area alone, 735,000 people owe nearly $26.6 billion.
Thank you. $26.6 billion. That's a shitload of money in just the Bay Area, y'all. It's a lot when you think about it. And we're currently in $1.8 trillion of debt in just this nation state, right? And so when you think about it, think of like all of these other large cities that are also like suffering because of debt. Like what does that look like? And here in the Bay Area, there's all of these people who feel like they can't move forward in their lives because of this debt. Can somebody read the second star for me, please?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
20 years post-grad, Black and Brown communities still owe some 95% of their original loan.
Thank you. Which means you might spend your whole life paying for these loans, y'all. And that's how I personally feel as a first generation Latinx person. You know, I have over $20,000 of debt that I will be paying for over 10 years. And that is not even included on the interest that I will be acquiring once the student loan moratorium ends in January. Can I have somebody read this third star, please?
I can read it. Black women own the most debt in this country.
Thank you. I think that when we think about the structures, it's really fucked up the ways that it has allowed for this to consist in our Black communities and the ways that Black women hold all of this debt and people don't talk about it. And we, you know, I think when we think of like all of these different movements, like Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black lives, like we have to acknowledge the ways that like we're also protecting Black students and Black women and the ways that debt has been not only burdensome, but I feel like debt is very violent in our communities and it's not spoken about enough, the ways that it has impacted not only our finances, but also our mental health and just our health generally, in the ways that people stay in very violent situations because of their debt in some cases. And can I have somebody read this final slide for me, please?
The most debt burdened places are generally Black and Brown communities, like the Bayview, increasing the racial wealth gap every year.
Thank you. Yeah, the Bayview holds the most debt in the city. And it's also one of the communities that has the most Black and Brown folks in San Francisco. And that is not by accident. That is exactly how the system is set up. The system is not broken. The system is doing exactly what it's meant to do, which is it's the divide and conquer tactic, right? And somebody that we're in partners with that we deeply believe in is like the Debt Collective, if folks are familiar. They're this really dope group that believes in abolishing all debt, including cash bail debt, the carceral debt, housing debt, mortgage debt, credit card debt. And so, yeah, they say due to soaring interest rates, people with student loans wind up paying much more for the cost of college than those who can afford to pay up front. That's a system that rewards the wealthy. And I definitely want to acknowledge that although this is very much so like a racial issue, this is also a class issue, right? This is class struggle. This is exactly what we're talking about when we're thinking about capitalism and racial capitalism. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about like strategies and tactics and how those play a role in our movements. And so a strategy is a little bit of a plan, is a plan to organize your people and your allies to force the target to meet your demands and help you reach your goals, right? So the strategy is a lot of our dreaming and it's like our larger vision. And there's different types of strategies to account for. And so there's organizing strategies, which is your plan for building your base and increasing the number of allies who support you in this fight. And then there's campaign strategies, which is your plans for pressuring the decision makers and neutralizing your opposition. And then we have tactics, right? So we're talking about strategies, and now tactics are something that kind of get into a little bit of the nuance of our organizing, right? So it's the specific activity used to apply pressure on the targets in order to push it to give you what you want, right? And so although it's really good to have a set of demands, and that's a part of our strategy, like those tactics help us implement how can we put pressure on people to ensure, excuse me, to ensure that our demands are being met. And so I can give you like the case of San Francisco Rising, like what does that look like in our campaign now? So SFR's strategy is to put pressure on Biden because he holds the most power to cancel student debt as a part of our larger vision for free college for all. And, you know, Biden, we already know, Biden is a neoliberal, somebody who keeps funding our police, somebody who unfortunately like is no different than any other politician. But unfortunately, it's somebody that we have to continue to put pressure with. It's the reason why the Debt Collective goes to the White House and has protests and sit-ins and teach-ins, because he did very much so ran on a campaign that he promised to cancel student debt. That was one of the things he said he would do. And it has been about however many months he's been in office, and that still has not happened. And so what does that look like for SFR? And so we have all these tactics, right? And so we do phone banking to students. We phone bank twice a week. And in those phone banks, we talk to students. We do something called deep canvassing, which is really understanding what do students need, right? Like when we have, if folks are familiar with phone banks, sometimes we have all of these asks, but the deep canvassing that we're doing right now is less about the ask and more about the listening, right? A lot of our organizing is less about being transactional and more about being transformative, right? How are we having honest and intentional conversations about what students need, or about how the impacts of debt in their lives have been very formative, especially under a pandemic without any financial security, where people are losing their jobs, their healthcare, and all of these things that are human necessities. Something we've also done is canvassing in our communities. Over the summer, we actually canvassed in the Bayview, because are people in the Bayview even aware of the fact that they hold the most debt in the city, right? And so how are we engaging in like political education and these conversations that can, help us build power? And we also have monthly student meetings that I'll talk about. We actually have one this upcoming Wednesday. And I think that's also another way to not only build community, but to also have honest conversations about, what this all looks like, especially when San Francisco holds like so many different campuses, right? There's CCSF, y'all, and then there's USF, which is a private, I think it's a religious school, who has like private funding, who also increases tuition by like 3% every year, who also has predatory scholarships after freshman year. How are we building this power and seeing the intersects in all of our schools? SF State, a public university who has gotten all of this COVID relief, but hasn't canceled any student debt, who hasn't provided relief to students, who hasn't given us more safety on campus. So what is actually being done with all of this relief fund, right? There isn't transparency on each of these campuses, right? And so we have to continue to stay educated and really build power. And then there's like mass organizing trainings. Similar to this one, where we do have trainings, and we also had a mass organizing training a couple of weeks ago, where we did political education. The Debt Collective came and talked to our folks. And we also just were able to talk about like one-on-ones and what is our self-interest statements, and what are our stories, because we believe our stories are very powerful and should be told in our organizing. And then there's like the political education, which I think is key to our liberation. Like, what is it that we know about debt, and how does it stem to capitalism? And what are the ways that like we have to move and navigate in these systems that are oppressive? And we also believe in mass action. Like nothing can be done without mass action, I believe. And so, I want to talk a little bit about our summer fellowship, which is really where was the container where we held a lot of this. So over the summer, we hold an 8-week summer Rising Fellowship, where we had 16 students of color who were paid. And we made like over 6,000 phone calls and knocked on over 600 doors to talk to them about the student debt cancellation. And we were also signing a petition with the Student Debt Crisis. It's another student debt canceling group. And we got 385 signatures. And we also identified over 400 people who do believe debt should be canceled. And one of the people we targeted in that process was Nancy Pelosi, who supposedly represents San Francisco District, who's also Speaker of the House. And so, yeah, what does that mean when we're like, okay, there's all of these hierarchies, but we're trying to win a campaign because we want relief for our communities now. And so that's why we have to think deeply about our targets. And so our targets in an organizing campaign is the person who has the power to make decisions to give us what we want, right? And so, like in the case of Biden, like I was mentioning earlier. And so, like I said, Pelosi was our target over the summer because, she supposedly supports students. I don't think she does. And she very much so over the summer came forward with lies about saying that like Biden can't cancel student debt by executive order. And she just didn't really know what she was saying. She got like pretty roasted on Twitter for it. And our persistence did land us with a meeting with one of the policy advisors for Pelosi, but it was a lot of empty words and promises. Nothing actually came out of it. And so we've moved our target, and it still focuses on Biden, who does actually have the power to cancel student debt, but he's not the person that we want to be most strategic with. It's actually our local administration. So in moving our focus, we understand that the administration of any campus, they actually are the people who raise tuition. They're the people who understand where this COVID relief is going. They understand the conditions of students. Well, they don't understand the conditions of students, right? That's why they can increase our tuition. That's why they can dismiss us. And so it's really important to think through, like, who are your targets, especially when you're thinking about abolition? Like, who is going to help us defund the police? And yeah, professors have also been really helpful. So at the state level, it's called the CFA, which is the California Faculty Association. And these are the people that we're really looking forward to supporting us, if we do have mass action, because we know that we're very similarly, like as students, we need professors, but professors would have no jobs without students. And so what does that mean when we need to build strategic relationships and be very intentional about our organizing? And so that also means like, yeah, what does our campaign look like now? And I think maybe many of you are also thinking through your own campaign, if that's around defunding the police and abolition and closing down jails and prisons and freeing political prisoners, especially under a pandemic. And so I think, yeah, it's always good to be clear about your demands. And so, yeah, so right now we've been in the process of base building and building community with like-minded individuals, doing political education, like I said, about who can cancel debt. It's very similar to power mapping, if folks are familiar, having, thinking through your targets, like who should we be building with, who shouldn't we be building with? And also, yeah, reaching out to students. We want students to feel listened to, and we want students to feel empowered to share their stories. And also, like I mentioned, around like clear demands, because we do believe in mass action. And yeah, I also want to highlight this, which is like this just note that the Debt Collective came forward with. So basically, Miguel Cardona, he is the Secretary of Education, and he is one of our key targets in terms of like canceling student debt. And so it's revealed that Biden has been sitting on this memo that details whether or not he's legally allowed to cancel student debt. And this memo has been kept from the public, not for a few days or a few months, but since April 5th, as y'all can see on the memo. And this memo is now becoming public, but it's been redacted with these pink boxes. And a lot of people are asking, well, like, why is it that this is covered? And we obviously know why. It's because he refuses to admit that he could cancel debt for 42 million people, but he just continues to have this false narrative that he's not illegally allowed to do so. So we want to continuously put pressure. And, as people, we hold that power. And so, yeah, I really like to refer back to the organizing of Ella Baker, who was an amazing youth organizer, supporter in the creation of SNCC, and a civil rights activist. Can I have a volunteer to actually read this quote out loud for me?
The major job was getting people to understand that they had something within their power that they could use, and it could only be used if they understood what was happening and how group action could counter violence.
Thank you. Exactly, right. And this is what we mean about mass action. This is like what we're trying to build up to. And so, yeah, there's different types of mass action, right? There's sit-ins and walkouts. And one of our main components is like, we want to disrupt class. We just want to disrupt what is the status quo, right? Mass action is meant to be disruptive because as organizers, as students, as the community, we want people to listen to us in hopes of putting larger pressure on administration to come forward saying, hey, we as a collective, as a community, as a city, we believe that Biden should cancel student debt by executive order. And this is what's going to happen until we do so, right? Which is like strikes, boycotts, sit-ins, walkouts, which is why we're holding a week of action. And so we hope to hold this action after MLK Day, which is January 17th. There's a lot of alignment with a lot of San Francisco higher education institutions beginning at the end of January. And we want to be in solidarity with the Debt Collective. The Debt Collective, like I mentioned, has been one of our partners. And so they're having a week of action as the student loan moratorium ends. And if folks are familiar with like, what is a student loan moratorium? It's, so right now, if you have student loans, you haven't been paying for them, they haven't been accruing interest, but all of that will show up at the end of January. And all of that interest will indeed be there and you will be forced to pay. And it's very violent to think that we have that money, to think that people are still not suffering from like job insecurity and from the lack of healthcare and people still grieving their losses or adjusting to this, you know, to this, whatever it is that we're reckoning with in a pandemic still. And so we do want to make a statement as a collective, you know, San Francisco Rising with all students from each of the higher education, right? So USF students, CCSF students, and San Francisco State students. And we do plan on holding this mass action at state. We have been kind of, trying to build this power to do some sort of sit-in because, we do know that like the CSU chancellor and the president actually makes more money than the state governor, which really makes no sense because they really don't do much other than send emails. And so they need to be held accountable and at the very least call on powers to cancel student debt. So I've done a lot of talking. Thanks y'all for like, bearing with me and hopefully understanding why San Francisco Rising sees like the need and urgency around abolishing student debt. And these are kind of just some of our platforms. We keep them most updated with events and any upcoming like phone banking or trainings or monthly student meetings. And this is happening all in real time. So we actually hold 2 phone banks on Monday and Wednesdays. And like I mentioned, we have our monthly student meeting this Wednesday. I think it's at the same time as class, it's from 5 to 7. But I'm actually going to put it in the chat. And and if you're interested in organizing a mass action, if you have, if you're like, I have a truck, or I just fuck the administration because we should abolish that too. Or if you're like, I am trying to build student power, or if you've been impacted by student loans, join us in this, in this planning. We're going to start having committees and we're really beginning to think about our campaign. And so, if you have a mobile device, you can scan this and this will actually take you to an action and commitment form. And through that, you'll be able to see, you'll be able to put like your name, your phone number, a way for us to contact you, which kind of committee you're interested in, which is like, we have the logistics committee, the programs committee, the outreach committee, and the programs committee. Did I say that already? There's 4 committees, but and through that we've been planning a mass action. So thanks y'all. And I don't know who I pass it to after this, but appreciate y'all listening.
Thank you, Alex. I really love what you said about education being like a pillar of liberation. I think y'all are doing such incredible work, and I'm so happy to see y'all really mobilizing the community and mobilizing the youth. And I was familiar with SF Rising and the College for All campaign, but I learned so much through this in terms of like the actual like terminology and like the details of what it takes to run a campaign. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. Right now, we are going to begin our 10-minute break, which will be followed by breakout sessions and a Q&A. So right now it's 6:44. We will see you all in 10 minutes.
To see our communities, wanting to see our communities free of exploitation. And so it's a big dream, but I know that it's one that is possible. It's one that I'm always dreaming of. And I know San Francisco Rising is always working on aligning our narrative in a way that could be more inclusive and more imaginative of a different world that is just and rooted in decolonial love, that has joy and rest and all of these necessary things to be full humans.
Thank you, Alex. If anyone has a question, again, you can go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat. But I had one question actually. When you were doing your presentation, you mentioned that there wasn't any like when you were focusing on the College for All campaign, and sometimes there wasn't support from faculty, which I thought like was really surprising. How do you like what? I think I don't know how to word this question, but like leveraging power with like faculty members or folks that are like have some type of like power within organization or in the institution in terms of like working for the institution, or like having outside of being a student, having other kind of like involvement in colleges.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're seeing it right now at State because a lot of professors at State are also low-key thinking about going on strike. And so you know, if folks are familiar with like union organizing, it's like, yeah, like it takes a lot to prepare to go on strike, and there has to be like a lot of mobilizing and education, and right, like and sometimes it means that like you're not getting paid or your benefits, and so there is a risk, right? It's like high risk but high reward, right? And so they're right now bargaining for like a higher salary to get like better salary or all of that, but they come at an impasse. And so in that, it's like, oh, well, this is an opportunity because professors should be more intentional about the relationships that they're building with students, right? Because I forget what the CFA slogan is, but it's like a student's learning conditions is a professor's working conditions. And it's like, right, like there's, I forget what it is, but it's like thinking about like these conditions that like professors are working in. And it's like, okay, there's all of this that they have, and what they do will be no good if they don't have solidarity or trust or are building intentional relationships with students who are going to support them, right? And so it has felt like an opportunity, but also like student debt cancellation, unfortunately, is more popular. And so it does feel like professors are like, have just been more inclined into like supporting that. And so it's really sad that the CFA was like, oh yeah, we can't support this for, I'm not really sure what was the reason, but they were just like, yeah, we just can't support this right now. But now if you go to their website, they're like all about racial justice. They're all about, you know, they're like, we support defunding the police, we support student debt cancellation, we support all of these things. And, you know, and I really hate like the politics of recognition. Like we should really be building outside of that. But, you know, specific to San Francisco, it's like, oh, teachers are fighting for similar things, like, and professors themselves have a lot of debt. So, you know, it's like, oh, our struggles are intersecting. We too are feeling like we can't move forward in our lives.
Thank you, Alex. I can see Charlie has a hand up.
Hello, Charlie, he, him pronouns, visual description. I have my camera off. My question is, what is something either about the process or about like interpersonal things or whatever, any aspect of organizing, do you wish you'd known when you were first starting to do this work?
Hi, Charlie. It's so good to see you. Charlie actually came to our mass training like a couple of weeks ago, and so it's really good to be in community with you again. That's a great question. What would I wish to have known? There's a lot of lessons I've learned, even just in the semester, like really building out this campaign and working so closely. But I think if there's like some really like key takeaways when it comes to organizing, it's just like don't try to dream any less because people don't think it's possible. Like there's so many times where like we're sharing our imaginations and there are people who are yeah, and like it's good to have steps and it's good to feel grounded in what is tangible and what is realistic. But like I honestly always encourage like my own team of students to always dream bigger. Like we should always be dreaming of alternatives, right? Like I myself align with like an abolitionist principles, and a big part of it is like experimenting, right? It's like trial and error, and that's exactly what campaign work is like, right? There is no perfect handbook, and if there is, I probably don't want to hang out with that person because there shouldn't be. It's we're learning as we go, right? And so much of it is experimenting because the needs of our communities change. And it's also the way I think of abolition. It's like the ways that people are thinking of safety looks different from person to person. And the way we're thinking about like free education is also different community to community. And so it's that willingness that I think I'm always becoming more open to. And also like organizing is not just about transforming your community, but it's also about transforming what's within and challenging, right? Like all of these like conditionings and the status quo and the norm. And so yeah, I didn't realize that it was gonna like organizing was like an embodiment of all of these like spiritual and physical and mental and emotional aspects of my life. But I feel very dedicated to the struggle, and yeah, it can feel exhaustive, and that's why it's also important to have boundaries and to care for yourself and to find moments of joy, because organizing isn't always cute and pretty, and there are going to be losses like all things.
I'm looking through the chat and there was a question, I think, while you were presenting from Lewis. And if it's okay, Lewis, I can, because I actually is like a question that I thought of also. But it's if you know how much debt undocumented students have. And I was thinking of like DACA when you were speaking and how like this campaign, works in relationship with DACA and students that receive DACA.
They don't actually break it down. Like there are like graphs where you could see like by race how much students hold debt. And I can't say the number right on top of my head. So I couldn't tell you. I just know that there's like 1.8 trillion debt in this empire. But no, I actually tried to Google it on break, but I low-key couldn't find it. I was like, I don't want to be a disservice to this question because I think it deserves like a full answer.
Thank you. I think now is the, I don't know if I announced this before, but the non-BIPOC Q&A. So it's open to all. So same rules apply. If you have a question, you go ahead and raise your hand, or you can put your question in the chat and we can read it out loud. If there aren't any more questions, we might be able to go to breakout rooms now.
I think there's one person that has just raised their
yay.
hand.
Jackson. Thanks.
Thank you. I was wondering why you think you couldn't, you weren't able to get the signatures that you needed for that legislation that you were speaking of. Is it because people just like don't understand the campaign and like don't support it, or is it because like you just didn't have enough, like you just couldn't get to as many people? Like, why? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jax, for that question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Yeah, so running a campaign like a ballot measure campaign is a shitload of work. And so it does take like many canvassers and many people to like be out in the community. And I think it was simply just from not reaching enough people. And that's like, right, it's, you know, in some ways it just kind of sucks that we weren't able to like really like just fulfill that. And I feel like a lot of people were supportive, like we were getting a lot of support, especially obviously like from students who hold like thousands of students. But it's also like, yeah, it's very specific in terms of, yeah, like I don't know if folks have ever done like petition signing, but like it's so like the rules that they have around it, like like signatures don't count if your signature doesn't match the signature you have on your driver's license. Your signature doesn't count if it's not in black or blue pen ink. Your signature doesn't count if you accidentally sign the same thing twice. Like there's so many like nuances to petitions that, or not like not petition, to signature gathering. And they do it on purpose to make it hard to pass ballots or like to put ballot measures for people to vote on. And so because of this, they like encourage people to get like 8 times the number of votes or of signatures that you actually need to put this on the ballot for people to vote on. But like sometimes that's hard if you don't have the capacity, especially San Francisco Rising. Like we're a total of 5 staff members. And so, you know, like it's by no means like a huge organization. It really is like a people powered, student powered, working class powered movement. And that's why we have like our partners who support us. But I think it really was just about capacity and wanting to reach more people.
I'll give you all like a couple more minutes, but after that we're going into our breakout rooms. Also, Conrad just asked in the chat in case y'all didn't see what the breakout room question would be. And it's going to be, what are abolitionist strategies, campaigns, and targets when it comes to legislative organizing? And I think we can go ahead and get that started now. So hold on, y'all will get you in the breakout rooms in a second.